might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Yeah. Well, give me all you got, don't hold it back. Yeah. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. Yeah. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, change me up, bring me down. Love is too high, bring me down, change me up, bring me down. I said, bring me down, change me up, bring me down. Love is too high, bring me down, change me up, bring me down. I said, cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, change them. Bring me down, the love is too high. Bring me down, change them. Bring me down, I say, cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Cause I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Hey, hey, hey. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Hey, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Hello everyone, good morning. It's Wednesday morning, the 16th of September, and I don't know about you, but can you smell that smell? Oh, I can smell cheese this morning, and I was thinking, what might that be? What might that smell be? And I looked around, and then I saw all of a sudden, wow, something strange has happened today in my office. My socks have been blown off. Look, I've got my feet out this morning because my socks have been blown off by some incredible work in Year 4. I've been into the Year 4 classroom this morning and I've seen some incredible William Shakespeare work. Check out these fantastic pieces of writing, and we've got some head teacher awards here. There's so many people to mention, but I've given head teacher awards to Jolan, some incredible writing from Jolan, well done. Charlie Burgess, beautiful piece of writing. Charlie, you've got a head teacher's award. Harry Horsfall, Incredible writing. You get a Head Teacher's Award. Well done. This is wonderful to see so much amazing writing from our brilliant Year 4. So impressed with what they've been doing. Lots and lots of Head Teacher Awards given this morning. Who saw this one for? Layla. Some beautiful writing from Layla. Layla gets a Head Teacher's Award. Well done. Some wonderful Shakespeare work. Thank you very much, Year 4. Always great to see your writing. Who else has got a Head Teacher Award? Charlie Billingham picks up a Head Teacher's Award. There's a sticker, look. They're brand new stickers. Look, Mr. Spracklen's Head Teacher Award. Well done, Charlie. Evie G gets a Head Teacher's Award. Evie Goom. Superb, beautiful writing from Evie G. Thank you very much, Evie G. There's so many to mention here. What a wonderful class. Lily's done some beautiful writing. Check that out, look. All about William Shakespeare, beautiful William Shakespeare profile. And she's picked up a Head Teacher's Award as well. Who's also picked one up? Max has picked one up. Well done, Max. Some beautiful writing. Logan has picked up a Head Teacher's Award. And Year 4, it's true to say, have blown my socks off this morning. I've also been very impressed with some work that's been shown to me by Year 2. And I've had a phone call with a Year 2 parent this morning because there's such beautiful work being produced across the school. So well done, everyone. Today, it's our Storytime Assembly, and we're going to go back and join the Twits. You'll remember that last Wednesday, we had Mrs. Twit thinking that she was suffering from the shrinks. And we're going to rejoin the story with Mr. Twit trying to solve a problem that perhaps is not a problem of his own making. So sit back and relax, because coming up next, we've got our next instalment from the Twits.
Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors, where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. Then he tied Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top half of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied around her neck, some under her arms, some to her wrists, and some even to her hair. Soon there were 50 coloured balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel 'em stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can," cried Mrs. Twit. "They're stretching me like mad." He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" she gasped. "If those strings around my ankle break, it'll be goodbye for me." And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea. Mrs. Twit goes ballooning up. "There's enough pull here to take me to the moon," Mrs. Twit cried out. "To take you to the moon?" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh dear me, no." "We most certainly wouldn't," cried Mrs. Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, and with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below looking up. "What a pretty sight," he said to himself. "How lovely all those balloons look in the sky, and what a marvellous bit of luck for me. At last the old hag is lost and gone forever." Mrs. Twit comes ballooning down. Mrs. Twit may have been ugly and she may have been beastly, but she was not stupid. High up there in the sky, she had a bright idea. If I can get rid of some of these balloons, she said to herself, I will stop going up and start to come down. She began biting through the strings that held the balloons to her wrist and arms and neck and hair. Each time she bit through a string and let the balloon float away, the upward pull got less and her rate of climb slowed down. When she had bitten through 20 strings, she stopped going up altogether. She stayed still in the air. She bit through one more string. Very, very slowly, she began to float downwards. It was a calm day. There was no wind at all, and because of this, Mrs. Twit had gone absolutely straight up. She now began to come absolutely straight down. As she floated gently down, Mrs. Twit's petticoat billowed out like a parachute, showing her long knickers. It was a grand sight on a glorious day, and thousands of birds came flying in from miles around to stare at this extraordinary old woman in the sky. Mr. Twit, who thought he had seen his ugly wife for the last time, was sitting in the garden celebrating with a mug of beer. Silently, Mrs. Twit came floating down. When she was about the height of the house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out at the top of her voice, Here I come, you grisly old grunion, you rotten old turdip, you filthy old frumpet. Mr. Twit jumped as though he had been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer. He looked up. He gaped. He gasped. He gurgled. A few choking sounds came out of his mouth. Ooh, he said. Ooh, ouch. I'll get you for this, shouted Mrs. Twit. She was floating down right on top of him. She was purple with rage and slashing the air with her long walking stick, which had somehow managed to hang on all the time. I'll swish you to a swizzle, she shouted. I'll swash you to a swizzle. I'll gnash you to a nozzle. I'll nosh you to a nazzle. And before Mr. Twit had time to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out with his stick and cracking him all over his body. The house, the tree, and the monkey cage. But that's enough of that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. Some house. It looks like a prison, and not a window anywhere. Who wants windows? Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. Who wants every Tom, Dick, and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing? It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were meant mainly for looking out of, not for looking into. And what do you think of that ghastly garden? Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles, she used to say. They keep out those nasty, nosy little children. Near the house, you can see Mr. Twit's workshed. To one side there is a big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree, you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You will hear about them later. Hug tight, sticky glue. Once a week on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put the ladder up against a big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hug-Tight. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was Bird Pie Day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were, song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. 4 sticky little boys. On one Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with hogtide, 4 little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning against the big dead tree. They decided to climb up it just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting suddenly tumbled out of the tree and ran for home. Near the house, you can see Mr. Twit's workshed. To one side, there is a big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. He's in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You will hear about them later. Hug tight, sticky glue. Once a week on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds and Mr. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put the ladder up against a big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible hogtite. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was Bird Pie Day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were, song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. 4 sticky little boys. On one Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with hogtide, 4 little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning against the big dead tree. They decided to climb up it just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as could be by the seats of their pants to the branches. There were no birds because the presence of the boys had scared them away. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, "then it will have to be boys instead." He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat and not so many tiny little bones." The boys were terrified. "He's going to boil us," one of them cried. "He'll stew us alive," wailed the second one. "He'll cook us with carrots," cried the third. But the fourth little boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, "Listen, I've had an idea. We are only stuck by the seat of our pants. So quick, unbutton your pants and slip out of them and fall to the ground." Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and was just about to make a grab for the nearest boy when they all suddenly tumbled out of the tree and ran for home with their naked bottoms, winking at the sun. The great upside-down monkey circus. Now for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the cage in the garden were all one family. They were Mugglewump and his wife and their 2 small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked